In the winter of 1944, when Europe was buried under smoke, steel, and endless fear, the skies above Britain were no longer just a battlefield, they were a warning of what the future would demand. Inside a quiet, almost forgotten hangar at RAF Farnborough, an aircraft sat that looked ordinary at first glance, but carried inside it a revolution waiting to happen. This machine was the Gloster Meteor, Britain's first jet fighter, and it represented both hope and terror in equal measure. Unlike the graceful propeller-driven fighters that had saved Britain during the Battle of Britain, this aircraft relied on raw thrust, heat, and speed beyond human instinct. Many pilots whispered that it was not a plane, but an experiment that flew. The Meteor had been born from desperation, rushed forward as intelligence reports confirmed German jet fighters were already entering combat. Britain could not afford to be left behind. Yet from the very beginning, the Meteor seemed determined to resist its creators, revealing flaws that threatened to kill pilots faster than enemy bullets. The problem was not courage, nor training, nor even enemy pressure. The problem was the jet engine itself. Unlike piston engines that responded instantly to throttle changes, early jet engines behaved like living creatures, breathing air, choking under stress, and collapsing without warning. Pilots complained of terrifying throttle lag, moments where the aircraft refused to respond just when survival depended on instant power. Worse still, the Meteor's twin engines rarely behaved the same way at the same time. One engine would accelerate faster than the other, twisting the aircraft violently to one side, sending it into uncontrollable yaw and spins. At low altitude, this meant death. Flight test reports returned to the Air Ministry soaked in frustration and red ink. The Meteor was fast, yes, but speed meant nothing if it could not be controlled. Some officials began quietly suggesting that Britain should accept its limitations and focus on conventional fighters instead. Behind the scenes, the man responsible for the jet engine refused to accept defeat. Frank Whittle, the brilliant but stubborn engineer who had dreamed of jet propulsion years before the war even began, knew that the Meteor's problems were not signs of failure, but signs of misunderstanding. For nearly a decade, Whittle had been mocked, ignored, and delayed by bureaucrats who believed propellers were sufficient. Now, as jets finally proved their value, the world expected instant perfection. But Whittle understood that jet aircraft were not faster versions of old planes. They were something entirely new. Treating them like piston fighters was like trying to tame a lion with horse reins. The solution, he believed, was not to limit pilots, but to teach the aircraft how to behave. While senior officials argued for conservative restrictions and pilot discipline, Whittle locked himself away with blueprints, airflow charts, and fuel equations. He focused on the one thing no one else wanted to touch: control response. Jet engines failed not because they lacked power, but because they could not adjust smoothly to changing demands. When pilots moved the throttle, fuel surged too fast or too slow, airflow became unstable, and the engines simply gave up. Whittle imagined a system that could think ahead, responding faster than human reflexes. It was a radical idea for the 1940s, a mechanical regulation system that automatically balanced airflow and fuel delivery based on pressure, altitude, and throttle movement. In essence, it would predict engine behavior before disaster occurred. To many engineers, Whittle's idea sounded dangerous, even foolish. The proposed system relied on mechanical governors, pressure sensors, and spring-loaded regulators working together in perfect harmony. Critics called it fragile, overcomplicated, and impossible to maintain under combat conditions. Wartime Britain needed simple solutions, not delicate machines filled with moving parts. One official famously argued that pilots should fly aircraft, not negotiate with machines. But Whittle pushed back, calmly and relentlessly. He borrowed components from factories, locomotives, and even submarine systems. Anything that could react faster than a human hand was studied, modified, and tested. The system was crude by modern standards, but revolutionary for its time. By early 1945, the pressure became impossible to ignore. Allied bombers were reporting attacks by German jet fighters that appeared and vanished before escorting fighters could react. Morale among bomber crews suffered, and commanders demanded answers. With few alternatives left, the ministry reluctantly approved Whittle's experimental modification on a single Gloster Meteor. It was a gamble born of necessity rather than faith. The responsibility for testing the aircraft fell to Squadron Leader Eric Winkle Brown, a pilot whose reputation bordered on legend. Brown had survived crashes, experimental failures, and enemy fire, not through luck, but through discipline and instinct. As he studied the modified Meteor, he understood exactly what was at stake. If Whittle was wrong, this flight could kill him. If Whittle was right, it could change everything. Brown accepted the assignment without hesitation, knowing that progress in wartime was always paid for in risk. The test morning arrived under heavy gray skies, the kind that seemed to press down on the airfield with quiet judgment. As the Meteor's engines spooled up, their piercing whine echoed across the runway, drawing the attention of mechanics, engineers, and officers alike. Brown advanced the throttle with care, fully expecting the familiar delay and instability that haunted previous tests. Instead, the aircraft moved with confidence. Acceleration was immediate, smooth, and balanced. During takeoff, the Meteor held its line without yaw or hesitation, lifting cleanly into the air. As Brown climbed through the clouds, he began to realize something was different. The engines no longer felt like unpredictable forces fighting against him. They felt disciplined, responsive, almost cooperative. For the first time, the jet did exactly what it was told, exactly when it was told to do it. At altitude, Brown began pushing the aircraft beyond conservative limits. Rapid throttle movements that once caused flameouts now produced smooth surges of power. Tight turns that previously invited disaster were executed with confidence and control. The Meteor no longer punished aggression. Instead, it rewarded precision. Brown felt an unfamiliar sense of trust growing between pilot and machine, something jet pilots had rarely experienced. The aircraft seemed to breathe evenly, adjusting itself to changing conditions without protest. In that moment, Brown understood that Whittle had not simply fixed a flaw. He had unlocked the true nature of jet flight. This was not a compromise solution or a temporary patch. It was a fundamental shift in how aircraft could behave, and how pilots could command speed without fear. After 40 minutes in the air, Brown guided the Meteor back toward the runway. Even during descent and landing, traditionally dangerous phases for early jets, the aircraft remained stable and predictable. The wheels touched down smoothly, and the engines wound down without incident. Inside the hangar, silence followed as Brown removed his helmet and walked toward the waiting officials. His report was calm, precise, and devastating in its simplicity. The aircraft was ready. Not almost ready. Not promising. Ready. That assessment carried enormous weight. Within days, orders were issued to modify additional Meteors. Training programs were rewritten. Pilots were taught not only how to fly jets, but how to understand their behavior. Britain's first operational jet fighter had finally come of age. Although the Gloster Meteor would see limited combat before the war ended, its importance extended far beyond immediate results. Whittle's control system became the conceptual foundation for modern jet engine management. The idea that machines could regulate themselves, assisting pilots rather than burdening them, reshaped aviation philosophy. Over time, mechanical regulators evolved into electronic systems, and later into fully digital controls. The Meteor marked the moment aviation crossed from raw mechanical force into intelligent power management. What once seemed excessive and impractical became essential. Engineers across the world took note, quietly adopting principles born from Whittle's stubborn refusal to accept limitations. The deeper lesson hidden inside the Meteor's success had nothing to do with raw speed alone, and everything to do with how humanity learns to confront the unknown. Every major leap in aviation history had first appeared dangerous, unnecessary, and irresponsible to those who were comfortable with what already worked. Whittle's system faced resistance not because it lacked logic, but because it challenged habits formed over decades of propeller-driven flight. The engineers who doubted him were not villains. They were men shaped by experience, men who had learned that simplicity saved lives in war. But the jet age demanded a different kind of courage, one that accepted complexity as the price of progress. By trusting physics instead of fear, Whittle proved that control does not come from limiting power, but from understanding it. The jet engine, once viewed as a violent and unpredictable force, became disciplined through knowledge and innovation. In doing so, the Meteor changed how pilots thought, how engineers designed, and how nations planned their future in the air. The skies would never again belong to those who played it safe. As the war moved into its final months, the quiet success achieved at Farnborough never reached newspaper headlines or victory speeches, yet its impact spread silently across the world. While soldiers marched and cities burned, a new era of flight was already taking shape inside metal hangars and engineering offices. The Gloster Meteor did not win the war on its own, but it rewrote the rules of what was possible. Jets would soon replace propellers, speed would be measured in moments rather than miles, and aerial combat would evolve into something faster and deadlier than anyone had imagined in 1939. That transformation began not with certainty, but with risk, doubt, and a single idea that refused to die. In that hangar, beneath gray skies and humming engines, the future of aviation was forged by men who dared to trust an impossible solution. History would remember the victories in the air, but the real triumph was quieter, the moment when fear gave way to understanding, and the sky itself changed forever.